The initial D timeline is one of the biggest enigmas within the community at large, and that's due to the time period being nebulous, especially with some of the cars being featured later within the series, such as the 350Z and the potential GT86 at the end of the series. I've seen some people say that this was initial D within the early 2010s. However, I disagree with this assessment, and I'm going to explain my own theory for initial D's timeline, and how my explanation makes a bit of sense. So let's get into my hypothesis for how the initial D timeline works. The first indication of a timeline marker is when Keisuke remarks on how old the AE86 is, which would be around 10 years. Although, as I was trying to grab footage of him specifically marking the 86's age, I couldn't find it. But for now, the fact that he calls it old is enough for me. So this places the timeline anywhere from 1993 to 1997 with all the possible options for what model the 86 is, as they were produced from 1983 to 1987. However, when most people talk like this, they're not being exact with the day, so it very well could be more than 10 years, but no more than 15, as he would call it at least more than 15 years old, or at least close to 20 years old, in my opinion. But that's just me, since it is a definite timeline marker, so I say it's anywhere between 10 and 15 years old. Now, this is based off of the assumption that the A6 is anywhere near 10 to 15 years old, which it probably is. However, this is the really thing that only proves any time period of when initial D could take place, or at least the first building block of it. So let's assume anywhere from 10 years to 14 to 15 years is up for game here. Let's meet in the middle and say that it's 13 years and 6 months old, basically bringing us to the year 2000. The end of first stage signals the end of summer, and into second stage we fall into autumn, and when third stage rolls around, winter comes. By the time third stage ends, we are in 2001. And from what I could gather from the Project D portion of Initial D, it lasts around 1 year, so it would end in the summer of 2002. Now, this timeline brings up several issues with some of the cars shown. For example, the R34 Godfoot drives wasn't released until 2002, and the Ikeda's 350Z didn't come out until 2003. So what's going on here? Is the Initial D timeline just completely screwed, or is there something more than meets the surface with this entire timeline? And well, I think I might have the answer, and that answer is Takemi's engine. For those who don't know, Takemi's engine is a 4AGE 20-valve engine that can rev up to 11,000 RPM, although judging by the anime, it can rev up to 12,500 RPM. This engine with the 11K variant is incredibly rare, so much so that some have actually debated its existence, but it is supposedly real. So why is this engine key to solving the initial D timeline discrepancy of the R34 and the 350Z? It's because of how it was acquired. In second stage, when the engine is finally revealed, Yuichi comments on how rare the engine is and questions Bunta on how he got it in the first place, and Bunta basically gives a vague answer. However, if we rewind back time to the first stage, we hear Bunta talk with Keiichi Tsuchiya, the Drift King himself. The way the two talk during this phone call is very casual, like they have a history with each other. They also talk about people that are basically talking about Bunta's son, even with the people Tsuchiya, surrounds himself with. So basically, Takemi is being talked about in higher levels of professional motorsports within Japan around this time, is what I'm trying to say. I believe that Mr. Tsuchiya actually gifted Bunta with the WRX and the new A6 engine. This theory or sub-theory helps us understand that powerful and significant people are involved with the underground race scene, and this is where the 350Z and the R34 come into play. Both of these cars share the same manufacturer, which is Nissan. Godfoot has driven the Skyline series ever since the R32, although I could be wrong and maybe he's driven all the Skyline variants including the Kenmari due to how old he is. This would make him a Skyline enthusiast and perhaps have a better understanding of how the numerous Skylines operate and how they function. And that basically contributes to him driving the Skylines perfectly, or drifting them, or driving them in a way that they're not really supposed to, as seen by the Godfoot versus Keisuke battle. Anyways, this basically would attract people higher up within the automotive world that are basically our Japan street racing scene around this time. So what if one of the developers of the R34 Skyline specifically gifted this car to Godfoot because of how good he was with the other Skylines, just like how Mr. Tsuchiya gave the new A6 engine to Bunta and the WRX as well. Now, that explains the R34, but what about the 350Z? The 350Z shown in Initial D wouldn't come out until 2003, so is this a case of the developers of the 350Z giving Ikeda a production model before it came out? Probably. Initially, I had thought the R34 was being used as a prototype for the actual production model. That was my theory for the R34 until I found out that this specific model of it had been in testing since 1999. This idea was also present for the 350Z, and I have more room to believe that this is most likely what happened with the 350Z, as it had no prior pre-2000 testing that was to be recorded from what I could find. So perhaps this 350Z is a production model that was to be secretly tested on public roads to see how it performs and see what changes could be made to improve certain aspects of the car. I believe this is why some cars that shouldn't be shown in the series are in fact shown. Mainly, these are the only two I could really think of, if we assume that Initial D takes place, when I said it took place earlier in the video. Is the idea of manufacturers sending out prototypical production models to well-connected street races within the automotive industry a bit far? From what's been shown in Initial D, probably not, as this is most likely how Bunta got his WRX, Takumi got his new engine, etc., etc. But hey, that's just a theory. An Initial D theory. Thanks for watching.